Goodness will destroy you. Not because the world is cruel, but because you think goodness is power when it's actually the opposite. Right now, someone you've helped is planning to betray you. Someone you've been generous to feels entitled to more. Someone you've forgiven is preparing to test you again. And you don't see it coming because you've been conditioned to believe that kindness earns respect, that generosity builds loyalty, that moral righteousness protects your position. Machiavelli knew this was a lie 500 years ago. In The Prince, he didn't write a book about ethics, he wrote an autopsy report on power. And what he discovered is still killing the careers, relationships, and influence of good people today. This isn't another surface breakdown of Machiavellian quotes. Most people who talk about Machiavelli treat him like a movie villain or paste his words over gym motivation videos. They've never read him. I have. And what you're about to hear will make you uncomfortable, because if you keep operating under the assumption that goodness is rewarded, you'll keep losing to people who understand what Machiavelli understood, that the appearance of virtue matters infinitely more than virtue itself. Stay close. By the end, you'll see exactly why your goodness has been bleeding you dry and what to do about it. Let's start with a story. Florence, 1502. A young diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli is sent to observe Caesar Borgia, one of the most feared men in Italy. Borgia had just conquered the Romagna region, but he had a problem. His mercenary commander, Ramiro De Orco, had restored order through brutal efficiency. The people feared De Orco, but they also hated him. Borgia needed stability without the resentment. So he did something that would later define Machiavellian strategy. One morning, the people of Cesena woke to find Ramiro de Orco's body in the town square, cut in half with a bloody knife beside it. Borgia had executed his own commander. The people celebrated. Order remained. Borgia's hands appeared clean. Machiavelli watched this and understood something most people never will. Power requires you to do terrible things, but survival requires that you never look terrible while doing them. That's the lesson no one wants to hear. You can be ruthless or you can be visible, but you cannot be both and survive. The good people, the transparent ones, the morally consistent ones, they announce their principles and then get destroyed by them. Because principles, when they're inflexible, aren't strength, they're predictability. And predictability is control handed to your enemies. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 15 of The Prince that any ruler who tries to act virtuously in all situations will inevitably be ruined among so many who are not virtuous. Read that again. He's not saying everyone is evil. He's saying the world is mixed. Some people play fair, many don't. And if you're the only one following the rules in a game where others aren't, you don't lose honorably, you just lose. Think about your own life right now. How many times have you been generous with your time, your energy, your resources, assuming it would be remembered? How many times have you been honest and direct, thinking transparency builds trust, only to watch someone use your honesty as ammunition later? You thought you were investing in goodwill. You were actually training people to take from you without consequence. Machiavelli observed this pattern in every failed ruler he studied. The ones who tried to be universally loved, universally fair, universally kind, they didn't last. They were betrayed by allies, abandoned by the people they protected, or outmaneuvered by rivals who understood that morality is a tool, not a religion. Here's where Machiavelli cuts deeper. He makes a distinction that most people miss entirely, the difference between virtù and virtue. Virtue, in the traditional sense, means moral goodness, doing the right thing because it's right, regardless of outcome. Virtù, in Machiavelli's framework, means effectiveness, the capacity to achieve your aims using whatever means the situation requires. A leader with virtù adapts. He's generous when generosity creates loyalty. He's ruthless when ruthlessness prevents chaos. He doesn't operate from a fixed moral script written by people who will never face his consequences. He operates from reality. And this is what terrifies people about Machiavelli. He's not saying be evil. He's saying that rigid goodness, the kind that never bends, is not strength. It's weakness wearing a halo. Let's talk about generosity, because this is where most people unknowingly destroy themselves. In chapter 16, Machiavelli warns that liberality, when excessive, leads to ruin. You'd assume being generous makes people love you. It doesn't. Here's the mechanism. When you give constantly, people stop perceiving it as generosity. It becomes baseline, expected, entitled. The gift loses meaning because there's no scarcity. And the moment you stop or even hesitate, they don't feel grateful for what they received. They feel betrayed by what you're withholding. You've conditioned them to take, not appreciate. Worse, sustaining that generosity drains you. To keep giving, you have to extract from somewhere else. You overextend yourself. You ration your own needs. You go into debt, financial or emotional. And now the same people who benefited from your kindness resent you for the cost of maintaining it. Machiavelli gives the example of rulers who tried to maintain reputations for generosity and had to tax their people heavily to fund it. They became hated for the very thing they thought would make them loved. The people didn't remember the gifts, they remembered the price. The lesson isn't never be generous. The lesson is make generosity count. Give when it's strategic. Give when it's visible and memorable. Give when it creates obligation or leverage. But never give so much that you weaken yourself or normalize the act. Scarcity creates value. The person who gives rarely but meaningfully is remembered. The person who gives constantly is forgotten or exploited. This applies to your time, your attention, your favors, your money. Ask yourself right now, who in your life takes from you regularly and gives nothing back? You created that dynamic by being too available, too giving, too good. Now we arrive at the question everyone knows, but no one truly understands. Is it better to be loved or feared? Machiavelli answers in chapter 17 with the coldness of a surgeon. If you cannot be both, choose fear. Not because fear is pleasant, but because it's reliable. Love is conditional and unstable. People love you when you serve their interests, when you make them feel good, when you align with their needs. The second you stop, or the second someone else offers them more, their love evaporates. You've seen this. The friend who disappeared when you had nothing to offer. The partner who left when you were no longer useful. The colleague who smiled in meetings and then undermined you in private. They loved the value you provided, not you. Fear, on the other hand, is structural. People don't fear you because they like you. They fear you because they understand consequences. That understanding doesn't require affection. It requires clarity and consistency. Here's what people misunderstand. Machiavelli is not telling you to terrorize people. He's telling you to be credible in your boundaries. If you're all warmth and no enforcement, people will test you. They'll push limits. They'll cross lines. Not because they're inherently malicious, but because you've signaled there's no cost to doing so. Compare that to someone who is kind and supportive, but also unmistakably clear about what they will not tolerate. That person is both loved and feared in the functional sense. People enjoy their presence, but no one disrespects them. That's the balance Machiavelli is describing. The issue is that most people lean so hard into being loved that they lose the fear component entirely. And once you lose it, regaining respect requires harshness, which makes you hated. You can't go from doormat to dictator without backlash. The skill is never becoming the doormat in the first place. Let me show you how this plays out in modern terms. Think about workplace dynamics. The manager who's everyone's friend, who never enforces deadlines, who always gives second chances, becomes the manager no one respects. Productivity drops, standards collapse. People show up late, miss targets, underdeliver, because they know there's no real consequence. Now think about the manager who is fair but firm, who supports you when you perform but holds you accountable when you don't. That manager is feared in the healthy sense, not hated. Feared. There's a difference. The same principle applies in relationships. The person who always forgives, who always understands, who never walks away, trains their partner to disrespect them. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're the architecture of respect. Without them, love becomes exploitation. Here's a cost of goodness no one discusses. It makes you legible. When you're in a position of visibility or influence, people study you. They watch your patterns. They test your limits. If your pattern is always choosing the moral high ground, always forgiving, always prioritizing fairness, you become predictable. And predictability is control. Your enemies know you won't retaliate harshly. Your competitors know you won't play dirty. Your allies know you won't abandon them even when they underperform. So all three groups act without restraint. You've removed the deterrent. Machiavelli saw this repeatedly in the leaders he analyzed. The good ones, the ethical ones, the idealistic ones, they collapsed, not because they were weak, but because their goodness made them readable. And once you're readable, you're manageable. There's another cost that's even quieter: internal erosion. When you commit to being good in every situation, you're constantly managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own truth. You filter your opinions, you soften your boundaries, you suppress your instincts to avoid conflict. That's not virtue, that's self-abandonment. Over time, you lose clarity about what you actually think, what you actually want, what you're actually willing to tolerate, because you've spent years being palatable instead of honest. Machiavelli would call this the worst outcome, because you've sacrificed not just your power, but your identity. You've become a mirror of others' expectations. And even if you win their approval, you've lost yourself in the process. Now let's go to the most dangerous part of Machiavelli's insight: the gap between appearance and reality. In chapter 18, he writes something that still makes moralists uncomfortable. A prince must appear merciful, faithful, humane, honest, and religious, but he must be ready to act the opposite when circumstances require it. Notice the word appear. He's not saying be a liar. He's saying that public perception and private action exist in separate domains. People judge you by what they see and hear, not by what you privately intend or quietly execute. So if you're privately strategic but publicly compassionate, you maintain moral legitimacy while preserving operational freedom. If you're publicly and privately good, you're transparent, vulnerable, weak. Let me give you a modern example. The tech CEO who talks endlessly about company culture, employee well-being, and work-life balance, while quietly restructuring teams and cutting costs to hit growth targets. The politician who campaigns on unity and compassion while running opposition research and attack ads behind the scenes. The influencer who preaches authenticity and vulnerability while curating every post, every angle, every word for maximum engagement and monetization. Are these people hypocrites? Maybe. Are they effective? Absolutely. They understand that the appearance of virtue protects you, while the reality of strategy advances you. The people who try to be transparently good in both image and action get outmaneuvered by those who separate the two. Here's what this means for you. Stop announcing your principles. Stop broadcasting your moral framework. Stop explaining why you're being kind or why you're setting a boundary. Just act. Let your results speak. If you need to cut someone off, do it quietly. If you need to be generous, do it visibly. Control the narrative without narrating the control. The moment you explain yourself, you've opened yourself to judgment, negotiation, and manipulation. Machiavelli understood that power requires opacity, not deception, but selectivity. You don't owe everyone access to your reasoning. Let them see the outcome and draw their own conclusions, preferably the conclusion you want them to draw. Here's the final cost of goodness that Machiavelli exposes with surgical precision. It makes you a target. When you're known for being kind, ethical, principled, and forgiving, people assume you won't retaliate meaningfully. That assumption makes you safe to attack. Competitors undercut you because they don't fear your response. Manipulators exploit you because they've seen you rationalize bad behavior before. Even allies might betray you if a better opportunity appears, because you've never demonstrated the capacity for ruthless consequence. Your goodness stops being a virtue and becomes an invitation. Machiavelli writes in chapter 19 that a ruler must avoid being despised or hated, but he must also avoid being seen as weak. And here's the knife. Excessive goodness reads as weakness. It signals that you value approval more than power, that you'll sacrifice yourself to maintain the image. And weakness doesn't inspire loyalty, it attracts predators. So what do? Abandon goodness entirely and become the villain? No, that's a shallow reading. Machiavelli isn't advocating for cruelty, he's advocating for calibration. Be good when it strengthens you. Be ruthless when goodness would weaken you. The skill, the real skill, is knowing which situation requires which response, and that requires emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and the willingness to accept that you will not be universally loved. Some people will misunderstand you, some will dislike you, some will call you cold or calculating. That's the cost of boundaries. But the alternative, being universally liked and universally disrespected, is worse. You'll be approved of by everyone and valued by no one, including yourself. Let me bring this to ground level. If you've been too generous and you're exhausted, start rationing your energy. If you've been too forgiving and people keep disrespecting you, enforce a consequence. If you've been too transparent and it's being used against you, become selectively opaque. Don't announce these changes, don't justify them, just implement them and observe the shift. You'll notice people start treating you differently, not worse, differently, with more hesitation, more respect, more awareness that you're not an infinite resource or a guaranteed safe space. You're a force, and forces are approached with caution. Machiavelli's work isn't a manual for evil, it's a diagnostic tool. It shows you what power actually requires in a world of competing interests, limited resources, and imperfect people. The uncomfortable truth he's offering you is this: goodness, in its purest and most rigid form, is incompatible with sustained power. Not because power corrupts, but because power exists in a reality where not everyone is good, not everyone plays fair, and not everyone reciprocates. To navigate that reality effectively, you need more than good intentions. You need strategy. You need adaptability. You need the willingness to act against your own moral comfort when survival demands it. That's not evil. That's maturity. If you've made it this far, you're not looking for comfort. You're looking for sight. The ability to see what's actually happening instead of what you wish was happening. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll notice the person who takes but never gives, the dynamic where your kindness is expected but never returned, the situation where being good is making you weak. Machiavelli isn't asking you to become heartless, he's asking you to become awake, to stop letting goodness be the excuse people use to drain you, to stop letting morality be the leash others use to control you. So here's the choice in front of you. You can keep being good in the way you've been taught and keep getting the results you've been getting. Or you can integrate what Machiavelli understood, that goodness is a tool, not an identity, that appearing virtuous is more valuable than being virtuous, that fear and love are not opposites, they're counterweights, and that the cost of unconditional goodness is your power, your peace, and eventually, your self-respect. If this landed, if you'd rather see clearly than feel comfortable, subscribe. This channel doesn't exist to make you feel good, it exists to make you effective. And here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. What has being too good cost you? Where in your life has kindness, generosity, or forgiveness made you weaker instead of stronger? Write it down, because the moment you name it, you can change it. Goodness has a price. Make sure you're not the one paying it.